The forest was quiet that night, wrapped in a brittle silence that only the first frost could bring. Leonard stirred from sleep just past midnight, stirred not by wind or cold but by something thinner, more fragile. A sound so faint it might have been imagined. He sat up slowly, the fire in the stove still burning low, casting weak shadows across the wooden walls of his cabin. Outside, the trees groaned with the weight of frost and the stillness seemed absolute until he heard it again. A cry, high-pitched and broken. It cut through the cold with a trembling urgency, like something small calling out to something it could no longer find. Leonard dressed quickly, pulling on his boots with rough hands, the instinct to investigate overriding his usual caution. He took the lantern from its hook and stepped out into the bitter air. Snow crunched softly underfoot, not thick, just a new dusting that made the world feel clean, untouched. The sound led him past the tree line along a narrow trail where he often tracked deer. The moon was hidden behind cloud and his breath rose in thick white clouds as he moved. Then he saw it. Just ahead, under a thicket, a small bundle of fur shaking, crying. A wolf pup, barely old enough to stand on its own, was curled into itself, its voice growing weaker with every breath. Beside it, barely visible in the shadows, lay the mother. A large she-wolf, strong once, now collapsed with her forepaw caught in a cruel steel trap. Blood had frozen around the wound, staining the snow dark. Her breathing was shallow, but her eyes were wide open, watching Leonard as he approached. There was no growl, no defiance. Only exhaustion, defeat. Leonard crouched slowly, setting the lantern down. The pup whimpered and edged toward its mother. Leonard knew the laws out here, about interference, about letting nature run its course. But this wasn't nature. This was cruelty. A forgotten trap, rusted but still deadly, left by someone who no longer came through these parts. He looked into the she-wolf's eyes, and something passed between them. Not understanding, not trust, but perhaps recognition. She had nothing left to fight with. And Leonard, in that moment, had no reason to walk away. Leonard knelt beside the injured wolf, his breath curling in the cold as he reached slowly toward the rusted jaws of the trap. The metal creaked under pressure, stained with dried blood and frost. Her body tensed, teeth bared in a silent grimace, but she didn't move. She was past resistance. With one swift motion, he forced the trap open. The paw slipped free, torn and bleeding, bones visible beneath torn muscle. The wolf collapsed fully into the snow, eyes half closed. He hesitated only a moment before sliding his arms beneath her. Her body was heavy with fatigue and pain, but limp in his grip. He lifted her as best he could, staggering briefly under the weight, her blood soaking into his coat. Behind him, the pup gave a soft whimper and began to follow, placing one paw in front of the other with uncertain steps. Leonard turned toward the cabin, wind biting at his face, snow beginning to fall again in quiet spirals. Inside, the heat from the fire met them with a faint hiss. He laid the she-wolf gently on a thick blanket by the stove, her breathing rapid but steady. The pup hesitated at the doorway, wet nose twitching at the scent of man, of wood, of smoke. Then, cautiously, it crept forward, pressing its small frame against its mother's side. Leonard moved carefully, grabbing bandages and the old field kit from the shelf. His hands worked without thinking, washing, wrapping, pressing the wound until the bleeding slowed. He poured milk into a small bowl, warming it slightly before nudging it toward the pup. It sniffed, unsure, but hunger won. The tiny tongue lapped quickly, desperate. Leonard sat back, his back to the wall, watching. The fire popped softly beside them, casting flickers of light across the walls. Outside, the storm gathered its breath again. Snow scratched gently at the windows like fingers. He didn't speak. He didn't name them. He barely breathed. The three of them sat there, man, beast, child of the forest, suspended in a moment that neither should have existed. And as night deepened and shadows stretched across the cabin, Leonard had the strange sense that they were not alone. Something else had followed them back from the trees. Something that waited beyond the edge of firelight, pressing in against the walls, unseen but listening. The air was sharper than usual when Leonard stepped out onto the porch, the cold biting through his coat in thin, needling gusts. Snow had fallen again during the night, blanketing the ground in a fresh, unbroken layer that shimmered beneath the weak morning light. The sky was overcast, dull and heavy, pressing low over the treetops. Everything was silent, the kind of silence that didn't feel empty but full, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. He took a few steps forward, the snow crunching beneath his boots, and then stopped. Just beyond the edge of the porch, the surface of the snow had been disturbed. Not randomly, not by wind or falling branches. They were prints, large, deliberate, and wrong. Much too wide for a wolf. longer than a bear's. 5 digits. Fingers. Each step sunk deep into the snow, spaced evenly apart, leading from the forest's edge to the side of the cabin. Leonard followed them slowly, rifle in hand, every sense on edge. The tracks led directly to the wall of his bedroom. Not to the front door, not around the side. Straight to the window where he had slept last night. The final print stopped just beneath it, as though the thing had stood there for some time. Watching, listening, then nothing. The prints ended. No return path. No scattering of snow. Just gone. His fingers tightened around the rifle, but it felt more like a formality than a defense. Whatever had been there didn't fear weapons. Didn't fear him. Back inside, the air was thick, too warm from the fire, yet somehow stifling. The she-wolf, still weak, lifted her head and gave a low, rumbling growl toward the far wall. Her fur bristled along her spine. The pup crouched low, pressing its body tight against her, eyes wide and fixed on something unseen. Leonard checked the locks twice that night. He bolted every window, placed a chair beneath the door handle, and kept the rifle within arm's reach. But sleep never came. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind against the cabin's frame made his muscles tense. The fire burned low, shadows flickering like movements at the edge of vision. Outside, the wind howled through the trees in strange, broken rhythms like voices trying to shape words they didn't quite remember. And in that sound, somewhere deep beneath it, was the steady thump of footsteps circling the cabin. No knocks. No scratches. Just slow, deliberate pacing. They were not alone. The forest was watching. And it was getting closer. Leonard stood frozen for a moment, the cold seeping through his boots as he stared at the footprints. They were unlike anything he had seen before, too large for any animal, yet unmistakably human. The pawprints led away from the cabin, fading into the thickening woods, while the bare footmarks circled in strange, uneven patterns as if tracing an unseen path between the trees. A low wind stirred the branches, carrying with it a faint whisper, barely audible but filled with an urgent, mournful tone. The air grew heavier, pressing against his chest like an unseen weight. His fingers tightened around the rifle, but deep inside, he knew this was no ordinary threat. The presence that had taken the she-wolf was something older, something ancient and relentless. The forest itself seemed alive with intent, watching him from the shadows with eyes unseen. Night crept forward quickly, and Leonard felt the cold gnawing at his skin despite the fire burning inside. He paced the cabin, searching for signs, but found only silence and the lingering trace of absence. The pup whimpered softly, unsettled by the sudden void where its mother had been. Outside, the trees swayed with unnatural rhythm, their limbs casting twisting shadows that danced like spirits. Leonard's thoughts returned to the journal, the cryptic symbols, and the creature that watched those burdened by fear. It was no longer just a story, it was real, and it was here. He braced himself, knowing that the forest's gaze was fixed, waiting for him to make his next move. The night stretched on, long and unyielding, and somewhere beyond the flickering firelight, something watched patiently, unblinking and eternal. The forest closed around Leonard like a living shroud, branches scraping at his coat and the cold earth muffling his footsteps. The pup stayed close, its small body pressed against his side, heart beating fast but steady. The moon slipped behind clouds, casting the woods into near darkness, where shadows pooled and stretched like restless spirits. Leonard moved with purpose, guided by instinct and the faint memory of his grandfather's writings. The ancient fire circle lay hidden deep within the oldest part of the forest, where trees towered like silent sentinels and the air hung thick with the scent of earth and decay. He traced the circle's edge with salt and ash, feeling the weight of old magic settle around them. The pup's breath came in soft puffs, its eyes reflecting the flicker of Leonard's lantern as the light caught in the wetness of its fur. The night deepened, silence pressing in so dense it seemed to throb. Then, without warning, the creature appeared from the shadows. It moved with an unnatural grace, limbs too long and thin, its eyes dark and endless, drawing the cold dread of the forest into itself. Its face was an ever-shifting mask of terror and sorrow, as if made from the fears of every soul who had ever wandered too far. Leonard did not raise his rifle or run. Instead, he stepped into the center of the circle, hands raised not in defiance but in quiet offering. He felt the weight of years of mistakes and regrets settle on his shoulders like a stone. The creature paused, its gaze settling on him, and Leonard whispered words born of desperation and hope, words that offered his own pain in exchange for the pup's safety. The little wolf looked up, its trembling ceasing, eyes steady and full of trust. The air shifted, the oppressive presence easing as the creature retreated, swallowed by the darkness it came from. Leonard sank to his knees, the firelight flickering against the ancient stones, and in that moment, a fragile peace took root between the man and the wild child at his side. Leonard woke with the first pale light of dawn filtering through the trees, the chill of the night still lingering in the air. The fire, once fierce, had dwindled to glowing embers, casting faint shadows that danced gently around the clearing. The oppressive presence that had haunted the forest hours before was gone, leaving behind a quiet so profound it felt as though the woods themselves were exhaling relief. The pup sat nearby, its small body still and alert, eyes fixed on the dense thicket where darkness once moved with menace. There was no fear now, only a cautious calm, a fragile trust that had taken root in the cold soil of the night. When Leonard led the pup back to the cabin, the world seemed softer somehow, the morning mist weaving between the trees like a whispered promise. Inside, the she-wolf lay motionless on the floor, her breath shallow but steady. Her eyes fluttered open, meeting Leonard's with a faint spark of recognition and gratitude. Slowly, with great effort, she rose, her injured paw trembling beneath her weight but healing in the grace of survival. The cabin, once filled with tension and dread, now held a fragile peace, a sanctuary born from courage and quiet resolve. The next morning, Leonard gathered what little they had and slipped away from the place that had held both terror and hope. Without a sound, without a backward glance, he carried the pup and walked into the wilderness, a man bound not by fear but by the unspoken bond between protector and protected. Only once, as the trees swallowed their footprints and the wind carried their passage, did the pup pause, its gaze lingering on the cabin door left far behind. When spring came, and the ice melted to reveal the earth beneath, fresh tracks appeared near Leonard's door. Small and light, a gentle reminder etched in the soil. A quiet sign that kindness, like the seasons, always returns in time, weaving its way back through the quiet heart of the forest.